Why does God allow tragedies? It's a question that has echoed through time, one that haunts the hearts of believers and skeptics alike. When disasters strike, when suffering feels unbearable, when the innocent face pain, how do we reconcile that with a God who is good, loving, and all-powerful? If God truly cares, why doesn't he stop the pain before it happens? These are deep, difficult questions, but they are not new. Throughout history, humanity has wrestled with suffering, and the Bible does not shy away from this reality. If you've ever questioned why God allows hardship, loss, or devastation, you are not alone. Even some of the greatest figures in the Bible, Job, David, Jeremiah, and even Jesus himself, cried out in anguish, asking, "Why?" So today, we are going to dive deep into this question. Why does God allow tragedy? What purpose could there possibly be in suffering? And how can we, as believers, trust him even when life feels unfair? First, we need to understand that suffering was never God's original design. In the beginning, God created the world in perfect harmony. Genesis tells us that when God made the heavens, the earth, and everything in it, he saw that it was good. There was no death, no disease, no suffering, only peace. But something happened. Sin entered the world. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden, they introduced brokenness into creation. From that moment on, humanity was no longer in perfect unity with God. The world became a place of struggle, pain, and tragedy, not because God wanted it that way, but because sin disrupted his perfect order. Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, in this way death spread to all people, because all sinned." This means that many of the tragedies we see today are the direct or indirect results of a fallen world. Disease, disasters, violence, and death all stem from that initial break between humanity and God. But that still leaves a question. If God is sovereign, if he is truly in control, why doesn't he stop the tragedies? If he has the power to prevent suffering, why does he allow it? The answer is complex, and while we may not fully understand God's ways, Scripture does give us insights into his greater purpose. One of the key reasons God allows suffering is that he gives humanity free will. God did not create robots programmed to obey him. He gave us the ability to choose good or evil, obedience or rebellion, love or rejection. And with free will comes consequences. If God were to remove all suffering, he would have to take away free will entirely. Think about it. If he prevented every bad decision, every act of violence, every natural disaster, every heartbreak, would we truly be free? Or would we simply be puppets, incapable of real love, real growth, and real faith? God desires a relationship with us that is based on love, not control. And love requires choice. But because people are free to choose, some will choose evil, and evil leads to suffering. Much of the pain we see in the world today comes not from God's will, but from human choices. Wars, greed, violence, and injustice are all consequences of sin in the world. But what about natural disasters? What about disease? What about the tragedies that don't seem to be caused by human choices? Why does God allow those? This is where we have to remember that creation itself is broken. Romans 8:22 tells us, "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now." The world is not as it should be. Natural disasters, sickness, and death are consequences of a world that has been tainted by sin. But here's the incredible truth. God is not absent in suffering. He is not distant. He does not watch from afar, indifferent to our pain. No, God enters into suffering with us. We see this most clearly in Jesus Christ. God himself took on human flesh, entered into our broken world, and experienced suffering firsthand. He was rejected, betrayed, beaten, and crucified. The most innocent man who ever lived endured the most horrific death. Why? Because he was taking our suffering upon himself. Isaiah 53:3 chapter 5 prophesied about Jesus, saying, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was pierced because of our rebellion, crushed because of our iniquities. Punishment for our peace was on him, and we are healed by his wounds." God does not ignore suffering. He steps into it. He experiences it. He understands our pain because he has lived it. And here is the most powerful truth. Suffering is not the end of the story. Because of Jesus, suffering has a purpose. Tragedy is not meaningless. Pain is not wasted. God uses suffering to draw us closer to him. Often, in our hardest moments, we come to know God in ways we never would have otherwise. Pain has a way of stripping away distractions, forcing us to lean on him, depend on him, and seek him with everything we have. Psalm 34:18 reminds us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." If you are walking through tragedy right now, know this: God is near. He is holding you. He sees your pain. But not only that, He is using it. God brings beauty from ashes. He takes what the enemy meant for evil and turns it for good. Look at Joseph. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit, forgotten and abandoned. Yet, in the end, God raised him up to save nations from famine. Joseph's words in Genesis 50:20 are powerful. "You planned evil against me. God planned it for good to bring about the present result, the survival of many people." Or consider Job. He lost everything: his wealth, his health, his children. He questioned, he wept, he cried out to God. And yet, in the end, God restored him and revealed himself to Job in ways that deepened his faith beyond anything he had known before. Even the early church faced suffering. The disciples were beaten, imprisoned, and martyred. And yet, through their trials, the gospel spread to the ends of the earth. God took their suffering and turned it into a testimony that changed the world. What does this mean for us today? It means that even in our darkest moments, God is working. Even when we don't understand, He is writing a greater story. And one day, He will make all things right. Revelation 21:4 gives us a promise to hold on to. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away. One day, tragedy will end, suffering will cease, and we will stand before our Creator, finally seeing the full picture, the masterpiece He was weaving all along. So if you are facing tragedy today, know this: God sees you. He loves you. He is with you, and He is working even in the pain. Trust Him, lean on Him, and know that one day every wound will be healed, every loss will be redeemed, and every sorrow will turn to joy. If this message spoke to you, let me know in the comments. How has God used a hard time in your life to bring you closer to Him? If this video encouraged you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. May God bless you and give you peace.